Ukraine? It's a good question to ask, and a question that we hope to have answered right now by our good friend from the Heritage Foundation, Steve Bucci. Steve, we welcome you back to America's Forum as you concentrate on foreign and national security policy there at the Allison Center at the Heritage Foundation. You also know whereof you speak in terms of having been boots on the ground as a special ops officer. Give us your take on the so-called humanitarian aid the Russians say they want to send to the Ukraine.
Well, I would be very suspicious of the Russians. They haven't proven themselves to be particularly trustworthy with regard to their actions in Ukraine. So if I could not search and inspect every one of those trucks, I wouldn't let them in. I understand that's politically a tough position to put Ukraine in, but I'd be a little suspicious of what might be underneath all that food and medical stuff.
And to that end, could you tell us how for lack of a better term, the battle for Ukraine is going? You know, a few months ago we saw the ethnic Russians and perhaps even some Russian troops who had gone on in there, not of course in official Russian army uniforms, but there was fighting against the Ukrainians. Has the Ukrainian military regained its foothold and perhaps taken control of the situation?
It appears that they are much more in control than they have been since this whole thing started. They've moved in. They've surrounded several of these dissident areas and are trying, without getting overly heavy-handed, trying to defuse the situation. At the same time, because the United States and the EU have finally figured out how to put at least a little pressure on Mr. Putin, he seems to have been somewhat deterred from pushing back real hard on Ukraine. Hopefully we're moving in the right direction. We can defuse this situation and return the area to peace and not keep teetering on the brink of a wider conflict.
Steve, I know we contacted you to speak principally about this, but there is another story that I'd like to get your take on. Earlier on this program, we featured Dr. Walid Faris, and we were talking to Dr. Faris about what is transpiring on Mount Sinjar and another legitimate humanitarian mission that it appeared for a time as if America might get involved there. Yet the story in the New York Times today, the headline reads, "Militant siege on mountain in Iraq is over." Pentagon says Dr. Faris took exception to that report in the New York Times. Can you help us unravel what is going on there on Mount Sinjar? Did we have special forces there yesterday truly assessing the situation? And have we decided now not to mount a humanitarian mission there?
Well, my understanding of the situation was that we did have some special forces guys up on the mountain. They did do an assessment and a reconnaissance. And what they found is while there are still refugees up there, it is not the massive numbers, the 40,000 people that some were portraying. My understanding is that they came back and said, look, they don't think we're going to need massive amounts of American conventional forces to try and relieve those folks. I don't think they're turning down this humanitarian mission is an all-or-nothing deal. I think there will be continued efforts to get the people that are left off the mountain, but it's not going to require a major deployment of American troops to execute that. I hope my assessment is correct. So it's sort of between the two things. I don't think it's a total shut it off, we're not going to do it. It's just going to take a different form and hopefully will require less use of American forces on the ground.
Steve, you have had tours of duty as a special ops guy. You've also been over at the Pentagon working there, implementing policy. With the minute 45 seconds that remains, my suspicion, forgive me as a former Republican congressman taking a look at this administration, I'm just worried a lot of what's coming out of the Pentagon is spin. Do you believe this is an honest assessment by military officers, or are we getting the political solution from Obama appointees at the Pentagon this morning in the pages of the New York Times?
Well, keeping in mind there's always going to be some politics and, frankly, some spin with any of this. The military doesn't get to just speak in a vacuum on totally technical terms. But I don't think even this administration, who frankly, don't really get into planning all that much. They like to react. Hopefully they're listening to the military planners, and what they do eventually come up with will be the right amount of force and the right amount of assets to help these people without any extra and without any, parade-like elements to it. It should be effective, but only as much as we need to get the mission done.
Fair enough. Steve Bucci, as always, we appreciate your insights and analysis there from the Allison Center on Foreign and National Security Policy at the Heritage Foundation. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having me.
Well, you heard Steve Bucci's take. What's yours? Is there a legitimate humanitarian mission in the Ukraine for the Russians? What about that humanitarian mission atop Mount Sinjar? Why don't you tweet me your comments at Newsmax TV, #America's Forum. In fact, some of your comments are next, right here.